Hello and welcome back to Rewind Reviews. I don't know what series we're on now, 8 or 9, I think. Isn't that crazy? We've done 8 or 9 series of this.
Is that 8 or 9? Let's try and determine it by trilogies. We've done Back to the Future, we've done The Matrix, we've done Star Wars, we've done Indiana Jones, we've done the Santa Claus, we've done Lord of the Rings. So I'm up to 6 already.
Did we do a trilogy first year? I don't think we did, you know.
I don't think we did. So then that's first year. So yeah, that would be this would be 8. I think. Think.
Let me check. Let me actually check to see how right you were. Let's confirm. Yeah, this is the start of Series 8. So there you go. Welcome everyone to Series 8 of Rewind Reviews. Series 9 is the season that contains what will be our 100th episode of this. Fucking bananas. But yeah, welcome back.
It's amazing how it doesn't. I don't feel we're anywhere near running out of movies, though.
No,
like this is a big one. This is a big one, and it's taken to the start of season 8.
Yeah. Well, how many episodes is even that? Like, let me check. So this will be episode 79.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? It's and I looked through when I was looking yesterday to think about what to choose after this, and I'm very torn between 2 movies, and I've still not decided. I when I was looking, I was like, man, there's this film we've still not covered. There's this film we've still not covered. Oh, we're definitely going to get to this. You know, and we haven't even figured out what our trilogy will be for this year.
Well, that's a tease for what your pick is not going to be then.
Well, yeah, it won't be it won't be the start of a trilogy. That's yeah.
Right.
No, not for our second episode.
No. You could pick Clerks 2 if you wanted.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I could do that. I think we'll save that. I think because I've still not seen 3, and I'd like to watch 3 with you, if we can still make that work.
Yeah, we need to try and work that out. Once I've done with the play, we need to work out doing that before
a little hangout. Yeah.
Yeah.
Be nice. Anyway, so let's for those who are new, weird place to jump in, but welcome. This is the podcast where we review movies from our past that have, usually some relevance to us. Occasionally we'll do something we've never heard of, and the way it works is 1 week Chris will pick a film, 1 week I'll pick a film, and between the two of us we sort of back and forth and do just sort of slowly moving through our childhood. This is a film that Chris has selected, but it's one that at some point I probably would have selected also. I do. What I do like about this podcast is there's different kinds of episode of Rewind Reviews. You know, whether it's one that I've picked that you've never seen, or you picked that I've never seen, or like one that like we're both very fond of. That really affects the tone of the episode. I feel usually because doing I'm introducing my friend to it kind of episode is different to we both have fond memories of this. But that's what we got this week. So. Do you want to, since you selected, do you want to go first? What's your history with Clerks, which is the film we're watching and reviewing this week?
Yeah. So a quick synopsis: Clerks is Kevin Smith's first movie. As the legend goes, he maxed out some credit cards and he filmed a film in black and white in the convenience store that he worked in. Filmed it across multiple evenings. I think it was like a 21-day shoot
27.
or something. 27-day shoot. And then it got bought by Miramax. And I think it's a really interesting. It's almost.
Oh no! Apologies. Sorry, it was $27,000. It was 21 days shooting. Sorry, apologies. You were right.
Sorry. So 27,000, 21 days.
Yeah.
And it started the kind of viewer Skewniverse. It's a really interesting one. This, like Dan says, it's one of the most I would say, and whether it's the film we both have, I don't think it's necessary. I think we've done films like Back to the Future, for example. I think if you and I were rating films, Back to the Future is the film that is in both of our top 5s, maybe. It'd certainly be in my top 5. I can't. Is it in your top 5, Dan? Or would you have to think about that?
I'd have to think about that. But yeah, it's definitely very, very high up. I mean, young Dan's favourite film was Back to the Future until he figured out Star Wars existed, if memory serves. So it's Back to the Future and Back to the Future still remains incredibly rewatchable and still one of my favorite go-to comfort films. So yeah, the Back to the Future trilogy in general is a big part of both of our childhoods, I think.
So I think, back in terms of like a mutual favourite film, it's Back to the Future, and a mutual rewatch the most film, it's Back to the Future. But I think Clerks is probably the film where we both know the most, the film we've done where we both know the most about it. Although Back to the Future actually is high up there for that too. And I think the reason for that is basically, is as well as it being Clerks, and the reason I bring this up is because it's really my entry point to Clerks. It's Kevin Smith. It's Kevin Smith's huge influence on quite literally our lives. Like, Kevin Smith is one of the reasons Dan was like, we should do a podcast. And for those that don't know, we've been doing this for 11 years across all the podcasts, and so this wasn't a sort of a recent lockdown thing that it was for a lot of people. This was a Ricky Gervais, a Kevin Smith, a Nerdist influenced. Let's do this.
Yeah, I think I will say for me it was definitely a lot more Gervais Nerdist than it was Smith, because I think as we started this, I was starting to drift away from Smith's podcasts, and you were starting to get into them. I think we had a weird intersection there, but yeah, no, definitely a part of it for sure.
And so Clerks is weird because I became, through his Q&As, through the podcasts, through all of that stuff, I became a Kevin Smith fan before I was a fan of the movies. Like, I was literally engaging with all that stuff and hearing him talk about films I hadn't seen. My first Kevin Smith film was for Jay and Silent. I think before Clerks, I saw Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. I saw Dogma. I think potentially, I can't tell you for sure, but I think potentially I saw Clerks 2 before I saw Clerks. Like, that's like how late the day it was. And as such, I've had a weird experience with Clerks where every time I've watched it, including this time, I've felt something different. Because the first time I'm watching it, I'm suddenly connecting the dots, and I'm like, oh, that's where this comes from, and that's this, and I watch it knowing, that's that's obviously there's a plot in the movie where the blinds are locked shut with gum, and the reason for that is so they could film at night. I knew that going in, like I already knew that. So when that happens, I'm not reacting to that on a plot level. I'm reacting to that on and then there have been viewings where I've watched it since on rewatches, and I've taken in more of the plot, and I'll kind of save that for later. I think that forms part of the analysis, but it's a weird. In terms of, it's hard for me to even talk about my relationship with the film when for me it's so mixed in with Kevin Smith in general, and listening to the podcast and the Q&A. But you got a different experience. Was your entry point to, I guess view askew Kevin Smith, was that literally this movie? Did you, unlike me, Dan, did you see Clerks before Clerks 2? Well, I know that's true, but yeah, give me your history.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with this movie is, and I think what's going to be a running theme in this, is how much it seems to sort of relate to, like, people in a certain age bracket, how much people from that age bracket will relate to it. I would argue I saw this quite young. I think I was I've just done a little bit of maths. I reckon I was 15, maybe 16. And did you have like a Saturday job at the time? Yeah. So you are the demographic at 15 then. Right. This is the thing. So I had a couple of jobs. I helped out there was a bar near me where I swept out the car park every weekend and threw away the glass bottles, which was always my favourite thing, because you hear the glass bottle smash, and I was a child and enjoying seeing glass smash. I'm a child, what do you do? And then the other job.
Do you remember when you went to, sorry, quick interject, do you remember when you went to a campsite for holiday or something, and you got to take the glass bottles to the recycling, and you could like throw them in that bin? What a satisfying smash!
Well, that's pretty much what I was getting to do for my job for a while, and then I was stacking shelves and facing up in a supermarket called Summerfield. So yeah, I was told. But what had happened? It was really interesting actually. I didn't know who Kevin Smith was, and I didn't know anything about the View Askew universe. And basically, we gained internet access in my home, and that was once I realized I could acquire movies online and TV shows. It like opened up a world to me, and it was very interesting because I was getting recommended films and googling films and just finding out about films and then just downloading them because I had that option now. And I remember coming across that Clerks existed, watching it, loving it, and then looking up the director and realizing that I had actually already seen one other Kevin Smith film without knowing it. Less than a year before I'd sat down and watched Clerks, I had been channel surfing on, because I often got, a Friday night, literally to myself, because my parents would go out. They didn't trust my sister to be babysat by me or on her own, so they gave her to my auntie, and I had the house to myself, usually. So I would just channel surf and watch whatever I wanted. And I remember stumbling across Chasing Amy on some cable channel, or maybe even terrestrial. I don't know. I don't know who had it and who was airing it, but I stumbled across it, and it was not mid film. It was it was still in the first act, but I jumped in without having seen the very beginning, but was drawn in, and I watched it and was and it enjoyed it, and I hadn't thought twice about it. It was a Ben Affleck movie. I hadn't really, you know what I mean? I hadn't considered anything beyond that. It was only after watching Clerks and then looking into the director and realizing that these films were linked and that Jay and Silent Bob had actually been in that movie, even though I didn't really remember that by the time I watched Clerks. But it was, the film was a complete revelation. It was I couldn't believe how, it was so clear that he'd made this himself when watching the movie. And it was so clear how this movie had come together. Even before Googling it and finding out that's the case, you can tell when you watch this movie that this is obviously a low-budget movie made by a bunch of friends who just wanted to make a movie. You can just tell. You can just absolutely tell. There's signs of that all over the shop. And I remember this was a really pivotal moment for me, because we've talked in the past about influential movies. When we talked about The Sixth Sense, about that being actually one that made me really think about screenwriting in a way that I hadn't before. And seeing Kevin Smith do it himself made me think about filmmaking in a way I hadn't before. And I think my choice when leaving high school to go into a film and TV course at college rather than the traditional A-levels, math, science, geography, all that, one of the reasons was this film. And it was just seeing that someone could do it and do it themselves. And ironically, when I would learn more about Kevin Smith and this film, part of his story is actually the opposite of that. He learned that actually he shouldn't do a vocational film course. Because that, for those who don't know the story of this movie, Kevin Smith was at a Vancouver film school. And he dropped out. After, I can't remember how long he did. I think a couple of semesters at least, where he met Scott Moser.
I think he did the first semester. It was the course was $9,000. He scraped that together by selling stuff, and then before committing to the next semester, which would have been $5,000, the remaining $5,000, he decided to go away and then use that $5,000 as part of the $27,000.
And we should cover this now because it's just because we're here. But he funded this movie in a bunch of different ways. So the $27,000, $5,000, as Chris just pointed out, came from not doing more uni because he just at college, or whatever you want to call it, the film course, because he just kind of went, I'm not getting as much out of this as if I just put this money into making a film and doing it. So he dropped out, started writing the script. He sold a bunch of his comic book collection, which apparently he's acquired back most of those since, but he borrowed about $3,000 from his parents. He also had a settlement from a flooded car. So there was a flood in New Jersey, and Jason Mewes had told him that there was going to be a flood and he should move his car, and he didn't believe Jason Mewes. He thought Jason Mewes was talking out of his ass. Jason Mewes plays Jay in these movies, and he didn't move the car uphill, so it got destroyed in the flood, but he got a massive insurance payment, settlement, and not massive, but an insurance payment now, which he was just like, well, that's going in. And then, as Chris alluded to earlier, some of the money came from credit cards, and how he acquired those credit cards is hilarious. That he would tell them where he worked. They would ring to check on him, whether he was getting a credit card. He would pretend to be his own boss because he was the only one who was like hardly ever there. Like his boss wasn't there very often, so he would answer the phone and be like, "Oh, Kevin Smith, yeah, great kid."
And it wasn't. I believe it wasn't even like I think I've heard him talk about it. It wasn't necessarily even him acquiring credit cards to do this. He would just be like bored at work, see a letter that was like, "You want a credit card?" And he'd just be like, "Yeah, all right." Like, and he just basically had, and he probably might have acquired extras, but he basically to do this, but he had basically started already collecting credit cards, which it was a very, very different time.
Yeah. So as a result, we have this situation where we have a movie. We have a movie that he's shooting with like all these different random funding sources that he's pulled together. And he said in the past that because he had so much credit card debt as a result of making the movie, if this hadn't worked, that would have been it. This was his one and only movie. This would have absolutely ruined him otherwise. So, I watch this movie, I hear this story, and it inspires a huge amount of that. And also, because the movie is so good, because the movie speaks so directly to a certain generation and seems to continue to. Clerks has been described as like a movie that launched 1,000 movies, because so many people watched this movie and were inspired. And while Kevin Smith has never been, the go-to director, he's never, they've never let him direct a big Marvel movie or anything like that. Kevin Smith is one of the most influential directors by virtue of the number of careers he launched.
He was at one point directing a Green Arrow movie and turned it down, and I don't think he wants to do those big movies, but I defy anyone to, whatever you think of his movies and whatever you think of him, like, watch a Q&A, listen to a podcast. That message of you can do this and it's fun to do it and you should go out there and do it and you should just give it a shot is embedded throughout his work, but also the way he conducts himself. Like, you barely, if he's got 15 minutes to do an interview, he's gonna spend 5 of them trying to encourage other people to get out there and do this shit. And it's such a, it's weird because consciously that isn't why I'm still drawn to his content, but it might be, you know what I mean? On some level, it might be, well, it's a real, it's funny and a real boost to the system, a real positive outlook, a real go-get-em attitude. That, like Dan says, has been incredibly inspiring for people over the years.
And I'm definitely not sat here without him, without question, because without him, I'm not as likely to have ended up at film school. Maybe I still would film school. I did a film TV production course, but yeah, I don't do that, and then I don't go on to do my screenwriting course, which is where I meet you, Chris. And also, without Kevin Smith's success on Clerks, he doesn't do podcasts. That's another reason the podcast doesn't end up happening, because, as you said, it's not the primary influence, but it was definitely a part of it. So yeah, it's really interesting. But the film itself, getting away from the Smith's ability to inspire others into a life of pursuing creative work, I think the film itself was a revelation on many other levels. As you said, as someone who had a job at a supermarket at the time, or around that time. Yeah, no, I think I was trying to work out because I don't know if the bar job and the supermarket job crossed over, or if I stopped one and did the other. So I can't 100% remember what I would have been doing when I first saw the movie. But either way, there's just something about this story that's so relatable, and I think remains so. And I think young Dan was very, very taken by that. The tone of it, but also the whole thing feels very like punk. It all feels very like rock and roll, very like, I don't know. There's something about that, like that tone that speaks to younger people wanting to sort of like throw off the shackles of like these sort of roles, but also at the same time the movie kind of acknowledges that there's also nothing wrong with doing that. You know, if that's your lot in life, accept, like, go with that. Like, don't put it above its station and make it like seem like it. You know what I mean? This movie's about understanding where you sit in a very wide universe, and I in a weird way it sort of ends up coming back around to that. And yeah, I just think that's all very, very, very sort of powerful for, especially for a young person to hear and see. So yeah, a huge part. And obviously, then that opens up for young Dan. That opens up the world of View Askew, and yeah, then you watch Mallrats and Dogma, and you move your way through that thing. And I remember when Clerks 2 was coming out. I was then on, or it was. Well, I remember being sat in my film and TV course and hearing the trailer for Clerks 2 had dropped. And everyone gathering around because half the course were there because of Kevin Smith, and we all watched it on, like, you know, on Apple trailers on a tiny screen in a classroom, all just trying to crane forward so we could hear it. It was buffering 3 times during
poor quality.
Yeah, we were all just like, it's Clerks 2. You know, we were all very excited. So yeah, I think that's kind of my history with it. I mean, it was a really interesting rewatch because obviously those are some quite lofty things to be talking about for a film that was made on 27 grand by a filmmaker that is I think divisive in terms of how people like his content. You know, Is Kevin Smith the Clerks guy? Is Clerks the masterpiece, and the rest are just like him living on that success, as some feel? Maybe one day we'll find out. Maybe as we move through Rewind Reviews, we'll look at some of the other View Askew universe films. I think very likely
it is fascinating.
We will.
It feels like, and I don't know if it's just actually this happens with a lot of directors, but it's just because I'm more aware of it with him because it's, you know, more engaging with his content. He talks about it more, etc. But there's definitely sea changes in his career. You know what I mean? Like Chasing Clerks and Chasing Amy were seen as the ones to remember and hold aloft. And then as time's gone on, people have begun to see and analyse more of the more problematic elements of Chasing Amy. And then suddenly Dogma is raised up. And then Mallrats, this film that was panned at the time. You know, the classic thing Kevin Smith always says about Mallrats is that people say to him, well, why'd you talk about that film like it was a failure? I had it on DVD. And Kevin Smith's like, yeah, but that's not the point. But now all those people that had it on DVD are working in film and becoming like, and suddenly Mallrats is held in quite high esteem. Like,
well, yeah, but also that ties heavily into one of his big issues with the film industry, which is this fetishization of the box office numbers for the opening weekend, which has been a long-term bugbear of Kevin Smith's, and those who know about, I think it was Red State when he famously went up on stage to sell the movie and chose not to, and chose to release it himself, which, you know, a controversial move at the time, and I think for understandable reasons. I think to pretend you're going to sell the movie and then announce not after getting everyone to show up for a screening is a shitty thing to do, if I'm being honest. But hey ho, it certainly made waves. But my point is, you just said it there, people have it on DVD. Yeah, its resale market was great. It was a Donnie Darko situation, you know, very, very poor theatrical run that then sort of took off more once it reached home video. You know,
I think one of the reasons he got the money for Clerks 3 was because the DVD physical media sales of Jay and Silent Bob Reboot were so good.
Strikes Back, I assume.
And you know that's built.
Oh no, Reboot. Oh, you literally mean Reboot.
Stuff, but yeah. No, like the Reboot. Like apparently the physical media sales for that were really strong. It just led to it was one of the factors in Clerks 3.
Ooh. Interesting, but yeah, so he's always done well in that sort of like, and that was the thing as well. This is another one of those, like, you know, friends recommend. Like I feel like I recommended Clerks to a bunch of people at school. Like I feel like I went and told people to go watch the movie.
I'm laughing because we got a friend who we were with in uni, and there was one day he mentioned casually that he hadn't watched Clerks, and then a few months later he said he had. It led to a big altercation between him and Dan. Where Dan was just like, "But you said you've not seen the movie.
Was it not the
like,
other
No,
way
I've
around?
seen the movie." Maybe.
I think he'd said he'd seen it, and then he casually mentioned he hadn't. And I'm like, and I remember being
sorry,
like,
that's
well,
what I mean.
Which is it? Yeah.
Yeah. Dan ends up like quizzing him on the movie.
Because
I think
I just
I'll be honest with you, mate. I can't say for sure at that point that I'd seen it either. I think it's perfectly conceivable.
But the qualm wasn't that he hadn't seen the movie. I didn't care about that. It was the weird lie. Such a strange thing to lie about. And it's because there are times when we sort of half remember stuff, and this has come up a few times on this podcast. There are movies we talked about getting to on this podcast where I'm like, I actually don't 100% know if I've seen that or if I've just seen chunks of it. There are movies we've talked about covering on here where I'm like, I literally don't know. But if I'm not sure, I'll phrase it that way. It was so weird to be so categorically, I've seen that, I've got opinions on that. And then to say I haven't seen that, I'm like, it was such a strange choice. Yeah.
So we as a group, because we were really good friends with him, and we as a group, we didn't really fall out much, like as a friendship group. We weren't one of those that were falling out every other week or anything. It's certainly the core group of us. There were a few. Anyway, we won't go there. But like as a core group, we didn't really fall out much or anything. But any argument that we did have was over just the dumbest shit. Like I remember once you and I had an argument about whether I'd misplaced my watch, and I jumped to like, well, what if someone's stolen it? And you were just like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, and that turned into like just the dumbest shit. Yeah. Like whether someone had seen Clerks or not, and me jumping to theft.
Yeah, because I remember distinctly the sentence I remember saying. I don't know why this always sticks in, which is just like, I don't know why you would assume someone's nicked it before you assume you've misplaced your watch. Like, my instinct when something of mine goes missing is that I'm an idiot and I've lost it. I rule that out before I start accusing others of theft.
I didn't go up to any individual and just
no.
I'm not saying
you speculated in a more private conversation with a core group about that, and that was when I kind of called it out.
Someone we lived with had mates around, and I was just like, well, what if one of them took it? Like, I don't remember specifically going, Jimmy with the red shirt. He's still
you didn't name a person or anything, but you had a specific group of people in mind, and I was just like, mate, why would you assume that before you considered the possibility you've misplaced your watch?
Yeah. No. I was a twat. I was absolutely a twat. Like, I can fully.
So what we're learning here, Chris? What we're learning here, Chris, is we didn't argue much. When we did, it was because I got pissed off.
All the other way around.
Both of these are me getting aggy with someone for doing something stupid.
Do you want to know a sentence? I remember saying to you, like, which is as like memorable to my mind as the watch thing. It was when we fell out. Again, the dumbest arguments. You and I had a fight on the phone about who did a video. And I said it was this person because I just who did a YouTube video, and I was like, it's this person. Like I watched it like the other day, like, and I said something like, I know for a fact it's this person, and it turned out I was right. But the fact that whether it was the fact that I was right or the fact that I'd said that really riled you up, and you were like, well, you said at one point, you went, well, I just think it was a bit arrogant for you to say that you knew it for a fact. And I was like, but I did know it for a fact. Like, I'd watched it the other week. And you were like, I just think it was a bit arrogant. And I remember saying to you, going, okay, Dan, so would you say it was arrogant if I turned to you and I said I knew for a fact that the sky was blue? And you just paused for a beat and went, yeah, I would, yeah.
No, I don't buy that. No. Sorry, I'm actually going to refute that. I don't believe I said that. That would be an insane thing to say. No. But I do. I still say you misunderstood. Not misunderstood, but I don't think I communicated what I was saying in the conversation we were having specifically at the time. You were refusing to look it up, because I was walking somewhere and you were at home and you were confident to the point where you wouldn't look it up because you were like, no, I just know. And that was what I was calling out.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I can't remember. But hey,
so I think I think a little bit of history
given...
rewriting has occurred there, because I've distinctly.
Hey, hold on, and let's not fall out here. And we've devoted too much of this already to this, but I don't think history rewriting's fair. It could. We're talking fucking 8 years ago. It could be history misremembering.
Sure,
I don't think it's
sure,
fair
but that's still
consciously rewriting it.
Yeah, no, sure, but consciously rewriting it or not, that is not my recollection of that conversation. Whether you're intending to or not, right. My issue was that there was a point when you were at home and had the ability to Google it and didn't, because you were like, no, I'm right, and I was like, because we had this conversation for like, it was like a 10-minute conversation, and I remember being like, we could just look it up and end it. Like, why are we still debating
well,
it?
If memory serves, the reason I'm not sure it was that is because I was on the toilet at the time. That was probably affecting whether I could look it up.
Right.
Because I remember at one point saying to you...
But I was walking home from work, so I had absolutely no ability to do that.
I remember at one point saying... to you... I mean, I'm going to get hemorrhoids at this point. Because I've been sat on the toilet debating it for so long. But hey, Dan, listen... In 11 years of podcast, you and I have repeatedly given opinions like they were facts. So hey, we can't, you know.
But I think as well, I would say those are like the 2 times we've probably like ever. I can't think of any other example. So you're right. The history is
I
the
can't
dumbest
actually.
shit, and it's only happened like twice in our entire friendship. We've been friends for quite a long time now. Yeah. I mean, for context for people, we've been doing a podcast for 11 years, and we've known each other long before that, and
And we've only had one heated debate about that, and I wouldn't say that was an argument. It was just a back and forth, which for 11 years is not bad.
Yeah. We've only ever disagreed on something with how we handled something on the podcast once. That's true. And even that was a like more of a like a discussion with 2 people who had opposing views. We respected each other's positions, but we felt very strongly about our own position. So that was a weird one, but it was that wasn't even a well. It was just whether we should put something up, basically, and that wasn't a one's right, one's wrong. That was literally, like Dan says, two people disagree. Whereas, look, I'll put my hands up. It was wrong to accuse people of theft before I just looked for the watch. That's fair. I'm okay. I'm all right to admit that. Back to Clerks. I think what's interesting about this film is I have literally almost, like I said earlier, to kind of take us into reviewing it. I've felt different things when watching this film in the past, and some of them because it's an interesting film in that, one, there's a content element. There's some content that makes you feel uncomfortable now. There's some content which, if someone went, I find it offensive, you'd go, well, yeah, that's fair. I'll be honest with you, there's a lot less of that than in Dumb and Dumber.
Yes, yeah, I think that's fair, and I think that's also partly framework, like, because in Dumb and Dumber, some of that really offensive content, you go, well, they're really dumb, and that's not a good excuse. Some of it in Clerks, you go, well, okay, let's take 90 minutes of your life when you were that age in that position and see how much offensive shit you said. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, maybe that's one of the reasons it resonates. And also there's very few in Dumb and Dumber. I think the targets of a lot of the jokes are people, whereas I think that happens less in Clerks. We'd have to analyse it more deeply, but the structure of it has fascinated me, because I remember a rewatch not that long ago where I was like, oh, I mean, it's kind of a sketch show, and I was almost sort of like, I was like, I don't remember it being so disjointed. And it kind of felt like it was just a series of moments as opposed to something weaving it all together. And I was really struck on this watch of 2 things. One, yes, but that is what a day in the life of someone that does that job is like. Different customers produce a series of sketches. I realised that one of the reasons that could be so jarring in a modern context is because If you were doing a modern version of this film, which you shouldn't do, but if you were, you probably wouldn't make it as cinematic. And I know a lot of people would be like, cinematic isn't the word I'd use to describe Clerks. But if you think about the hockey scene, I'm not necessarily talking about cinematic in its shooting style or anything like that, but I mean cinematic in the, you think about the hockey scene and the funeral like subplot and stuff. Those are big overt moments that if you were doing a film now just about two people working in a shop, it would be more subtle, minutia, like royal family-esque kind of moments. So I was struck by this rewatch, like kind of computing in my head. Oh, that's probably why I felt this last time. But the big one is it's not as disconnected as I thought on that particular rewatch. It's actually, thematically, it's very connected, and it's in that sense. I think the reason it might jar with some people is because it's it's a play. Really, like it subtly builds to basically a big monologue that summarizes everything, and then it sort of ends after that monologue. It's very, in terms of its structure and the way it's handling themes, it very much feels like a play. And that just really struck me. I don't know if you got any thoughts on those disjointed rambles, but yeah, that just really struck me on this rewatch.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it does sort of play like that, and I think that makes sense. That you it's always going to feel like that. I think when you're essentially just filming conversations in one location, it's always going to feel like a play, no matter what you do with those conversations, because it's always just going to feel like, well, we're going to have a plot develop over the course. And I'm doing it in sort of essentially not real time, but like doing it like it's set across one day. And you go from the start of that day to the end of that day, and like that all feels very much like something you get in a play as well. And I think it's smart because looking at the movie now, I think it's Kevin Smith leaning into the thing he's best at. For me, his dialogue continues to be one of his greatest strengths as a writer, and it's on shocking display here, considering his age. Like how good the dialogue is, and how snappy it is, and how good the back and forths are, while also communicating. And sometimes the characters say overt things to each other that are like, it's like at one point, I think Veronica says something like, "Oh, I just want you to, go back to school and get your life on track." And it's like a really overt, obviously, it's like she's not making it subtle what she wants from him, but that's like a character choice, but. Maybe the dialogue there is slightly like it's plot, so it's a bit more direct. But the rest of the dialogue in this movie, like other than a few moments like that, so sharp, so like witty, but like understated, but also like insightful often. The back and forths between the characters are all really like they feel like you're like sometimes especially between like Dante and Randall, you feel like you're watching it. Well, actually, I think it's also true between like Dante and Veronica too. Like it almost feels like a sparring match, like where they're having their fencing, and it's like touche, like one person's throwing a little jab and then the other one's coming back with an even better one. Like, and the same thing actually happens later on with Randall and Caitlin. They have a really great exchange, and it's just like. Oh God! If you're going to do a movie that's just people in one location talking to each other, well, you want your dialogue to be this fucking good, and that's what strikes me. And I think that would be true as well if this was a play. If you were doing this on stage, you would also need that to be true. So it's just one of those really smart things where I feel like young Kevin Smith somehow understood his strengths and weaknesses and what his limitations were at the time, and went, well, okay, I'm not yet capable of doing this, and this. So the thing I feel like I'm the best at is this. So I'm going to literally do something that fits my ability to do that, and puts that on Front Street, makes that the focus of the movie. And whether that was conscious or just practical, because a lot of this movie, I will also say, is happy accidents, right? A lot of this movie is happy accidents. Like, he wrote a movie about being in a convenience store because he worked in a convenience store. He wrote in characters like Jay because he knew Jay. And
happy accident or using what you got. It was the ultimate example of using what you've got at your disposal.
Yes, but a happy accident. He had access to that. Like, you know what I mean? Like the fact he knew Jay was not. He didn't go, I'm going to be friends with this guy because it'll be helpful for my movie career. Do you know what I mean? Like, so
well, and the fact and the fact that the people that run the store went, yeah, right. Like, I tell you, how many places have you worked in where if you went, can I film a movie here in the evenings? They'd be like, no.
Yeah, but I have thought about that a bit, but I've realized since it's because every store I've worked at or every company I've worked at has been a larger company. I've never quite worked for like a mom and pop, you know, like owned like by a family. Because I mean, RST Video particularly was just owned by a family and still is owned by that family today. So it's. You know, it's a little different, I think, because it's literally like an individually owned business. There's not a corporate element to answer to, where it's like, I have to say no to you asking me this because I would have to ask this person who would have to ask this person. It would get all the way up to head office, and I'd have to deal with all that. And they're just going to say no anyway because they don't know you. They're not going to trust you enough for that. So I was thinking about that, and then I was like, actually, I don't know. If I'd worked in like a corner shop that was just owned by a family, I feel like maybe I wouldn't have. You know what I mean? I wouldn't have been so surprised Kevin Smith got permission to do this. But yeah, it was all just like, you know, a lot of things culminated in a way that worked out really well to make this movie. And I'm not suggesting that there's not a bunch of talent involved. Obviously there is. You know, it takes a talented person to pull this movie together. But I do think like the stars kind of aligned in many ways for this film. And it was also the right movie at the right moment too. I mean, the reason this movie took off once it hit festivals and ended up picking up Miramax as a distributor, is because it was resonating. And it only resonates because it is purely his voice, you know. That is what this movie lives and dies on, you know. So yeah, I you know, if we're doing our, you know, before we get into full details and spoilers of the movie section, I mean, God, do you recommend Clerks? I will say after this rewatch, absolutely. This movie, mostly, with the exception of some less appropriate stuff, although I would say much less than in other movies we've reviewed on this podcast, but with that stuff aside, absolutely do I recommend this movie. It holds up so well. It's remarkable how enjoyable this still is, and it's a brisk hour and 30 minutes as well, which is lovely in a world of 3-hour movies.
Yeah, I agree. And how funny it is. Like
Yeah.
Like, because like it's things like the background, you know, the sign that's like, if you're gonna shoplift, just please let us know. Like, it's just there's so much funny stuff in the details,
but also subtle stuff.
Yeah,
like some of its jokes it just throws away casually, like without like making a big fuss about them. Just like one wry little line, like the end of the cigarette sequence when the guy goes, "Pack of cigarettes," that would be played so much differently in like a Hollywood comedy movie. That would be like the you know, that'd be like the big end to the scene. But here it's just so understated.
The one that got me with like that was they asked the policewoman whether this is the weirdest thing she's ever seen, and she says like, no, there was one case where we had to attend a kid broke his neck trying to like go down on himself, and Randall just sheepishly looks to the floor, and I'm like, is the suggestion there that he was that kid? And again, it's just
I think isn't there a thing where he talks about his cousin trying to do that earlier in the movie? So he's thinking about his cousin. I think that's what that is. The other one that I really love that I think is very clever, and again subtle, if we're just talking like little subtle moments, if you ever look closely, there's a scene when Randall is talking about the jizz mopper, which is a role that he is like a job he thinks is like a sweet gig because it's actually, you know, reasonably straightforward and you get paid quite a lot for it. And the guy is all offended and storms out, but the guy who storms out was buying paper towels and window cleaner and the various items you would need if you were a jizz mopper.
Oh, I didn't notice that. That's brilliant.
Which kind of implies that maybe the reason that guy was so offended is they were talking about his job. But it's so subtle.
That's
like the movie is packed with stuff like that, in and out. Like it's very, very clever in that sense as well. Like you're right. Its biggest strength, other than being very relatable, is how funny it is, for sure. Like, and we could sit here all day going through our favorite jokes, and I'm sure we'll bring up more before this is through. But man, boy oh boy. It's just really, really funny, which just makes any of the concerns about the filmmaking side of it, of which there are a few, go away. Because you understand the circumstances in which they shot it, and you forgive them for it, and the rest of the stuff, like the dialogue and the characters and the setup and all the jokes and stuff, are all so strong. The script is so strong that it just doesn't matter that the filmmaking is. And maybe that's the big problem Kevin Smith has had in his later years. Maybe because as a filmmaker, he's, from a filmmaking perspective, maybe he isn't the most capable out there, and he always makes up for it with his script. And maybe for some people that's not enough in a bigger budget movie, whereas you're more forgiving of it in a $27,000 movie. Maybe that's been his issue with, in terms of those audiences that have reject his stuff.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I completely echo the recommendation. I think, everything Dan said. So do you want to? I talked about the structure. Do you want to give me a specific? Give us a jumping off point for chat.
Well,
Dan.
let's talk about the handful of things that don't hold up. Let's get that out of the way as a conversation. There isn't a lot, I don't think, that doesn't hold up, but one of the things that it recurs through the film that is unfortunate is Randall's sort of weird, potentially sarcastic gay panic stuff, where he keeps assuming Dante is gay, and that as if that would be a problem. Now, because he likes Dante, and Dante's clearly like his only friend in the world, it's not meant that way, and I'm sure at the time young people did just throw words like the F word around. I
don't think, does Randall say the F word comes from Jay, doesn't it? As far as I'm aware.
Randall
Kevin
says
Smith
it. Randall says it in their argument at the end.
From?
Oh no, maybe you're right. Maybe it's Jay, because I remember it being after they have an argument. But actually, I think you're right. It's Jay that says it when he also calls him a cocksmoker.
Yeah, Jay says it a bit, and Kevin Smith has come out and said that wasn't in the script.
Right.
And the one thing he regrets not being firmer on is Jason Mewes just threw that word out there,
right? And
it jars with him every time he watches the film.
Right. But like, there's all sorts of little things to like where Randall is like, "Yo, what are you talking about? Dante's latent homosexuality?" Like, there's a lot of that, and that reeks of gay panic. And I think, I understand from the time that was like not considered a problem, and that's how that stuff ends up in, everything from Friends and Dumb and Dumber through to this. That era was just rife with this stuff, and we're coming out of the 80s where I think a lot of the modern day demonizing of gay people comes from. The 80s birthed many of the unfortunate viewpoints that then seeped through into the 90s, and we started to learn our lesson about through the 2000s. It's just the timing of the film, I think, but it to be fair, it's not a huge portion of the film. I think there's like 3 or 4 stray lines throughout the whole movie, and I don't think there's much else.
There's also, like, I'm pretty sure, I might be wrong, but I think there's a bit where, like, I mean, this isn't me defending it, but because it is indicative of, like you say, Friends, Dumb and Dumber, that time, unfortunately, and I genuinely don't think any offence was meant by it. And one of the reasons I say that is because I'm pretty sure there's a scene where Jay talks about blowing Silent Bob, and it's like, do you know what I mean? There is also content, and throughout Kevin Smith's early films, there is content sort of celebrating homosexuality, so it's definitely not from a hurtful place, but it definitely can feel that way when watching it. And the use of the F word just makes me shudder every time it's used on screen in the movie. There's also like you could make an argument of that Dante is shaming Mara. No, that's the actress's name. What's the character's name? Veronica.
Oh yeah, there is a reasonable amount of slut shaming going on, but I think Well, no, go on. I'll let you say what you're going to say because yeah.
But I think the movie portrays Dante as wrong for that.
Yes, correct. That's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah.
And the movie makes it very clear that, and everyone else in the movie that comes across that fact or whatever is just like, and it's kind of almost empowering for that character in some ways.
I think media literacy is important here because I think people not understanding there's a difference between a character saying a thing and being portrayed by that thing as wrong is not the same as the movie having that perspective. So it's like when a movie is set during slavery, and you have these slave owners using deeply offensive language and behaviors, and people go, "Well, it's a racist movie." And like, there's a difference between it being racist and being about racism. Those characters aren't the heroes of the piece. You know what I mean? And this happens all the time, and it happens in subtler ways. But that's obviously a very overt example, but there is also the subtler version of it, which is something like this, where the character of Dante presents this view, and it would be easy for someone and understandable for someone to feel like, well, is that how Kevin Smith felt? And especially when you get to Chasing Amy, which there's another version of this when you've got and the question is, does Chasing Amy challenge its protagonist enough? Bit different. That is the question for Chasing Amy to be looked at. But I can tell you now, for Clerks does challenge Dante's view on that. Clerks very much frames Dante as being wrong in the scene. And if anyone doesn't remember the scene we're talking about, it's the 37 Dick scene, which is when he discovers in a casual conversation with his girlfriend that she has filleted many men, and it has two of my favorite lines in the entire movie, which is when a customer comes up after the conversation, Dante frustratedly goes, "My girlfriend sucked 37 dicks." The guy goes, "In a row?" Which is amazing.
And there's another one.
And
there's another one where it said later, and the guy outside goes to follow her or look for her, and he's like, "You stay right there."
Yeah, he comes out, he follows his girlfriend out the door, and he's like, trying to suck any dick on the way to the parking lot. And then this guy hears that and just goes and follows her, and he's like, "Get back here!" And both lines are just so good. It's very funny. But yeah, I think the movie very much frames Dante as being wrong. In fact, Dante is wrong about 99% of the time in this movie, which is...
and that really, really struck me on this rewatch. Because obviously I was watching for... watching to knowing that you're going to review something always changes the things you're looking out for a bit more. And I was like, throughout the movie, I'm like, fucking hell, I don't remember getting so frustrated with Dante before, but he's always banging on about how he shouldn't be there today. He's always moaning. He's always this and this and this. And I really was noticing how irritating a character Dante was. And then at the end, Randall delivers a speech and says it all to him and calls him out on all the bullshit that had been irritating me throughout the film. And I was like, fucking hell, that's done so much better than I remembered. I'd never noticed that before, how irritating Dante was and how good Randall calling him out on it is. And like you said earlier, Randall's message of that's your lot. This is what you do. Make the most of it or not. It's up to you. But don't fucking whine about it. Either change it and do something else, or see the joy in what you're doing or whatever.
Shit or get off the pot
good.
Is the phrase he uses. Shit or get off
so
the pot.
Good.
And it's one of my favorite line deliveries in the whole movie is Jeff Anderson when he's like, "I'm not even supposed to be here today. You sound like an asshole." It's this really Jersey way, and as he says it, he's like fucking pelting him with Skittles. It's great. It's so good. It's a really good scene.
I thought it was so effective, that scene, because like I say, it just laid out all my irritations with Randall.
Right. I mean, so we should get into the wider sort of thing of the movie. Is there anything else before we move on that was you felt like didn't age well? So we talked about the sort of slut shaming element, but that's we've covered that. I think that they get away with it because again they frame Dante as being wrong about that. There is some gay panic stuff which not great. There is also, but this is just physically can't be helped because this just was the term at the time. Obviously, Jeff Anderson, Randall, the character, repeatedly refers to hermaphrodites and hermaphroditic porn. Obviously, the more appropriate term in the modern context is intersex. That term kind of retired for its use. so like yes, but that wasn't the case at the time. You can't go back and pop out my time machine and just be like, hey, by the way, in the future, this is the word you use. Try using that instead. It's not gonna fly. But other than that, is there anything else that you think doesn't age well before we move on to sort of the wider themes?
In the documentary about the making of it on the Clerks 10 DVD, they talk about how the scene in the bathroom, the fact that she'd had sex with a dead man was a big concern for people.
Yeah, no, I see. It is my least favorite choice in the movie. Because it's just so dark. The problem is more tonally, I think, than it is whether it's appropriate. It's obviously set up as she doesn't know that's what's happening. It's not like the movie specifically endorses necrophilia. For those who don't recall, by the way, why we're suddenly talking about necrophilia, there's a sequence in which an old man goes into the bathroom and takes a nudie mag in with him, and then the movie forgets about that, and later on Caitlin comes out of the bathroom and says, Dante was surprised to be in there and we just had sex, and Dante's like, I wasn't in there, and you realise it's the old man that got in there earlier, had passed away, and she, because the lights don't work, thought it was Dante and had sex with, unfortunately, a dead guy. And I think, again, the movie isn't like promoting necrophilia. It's clearly a horrendous thing. And I can see why it was a concern, because not from an appropriate, like whether it's appropriate or not level, because again, I think the movie very much makes it clear it's a horrible, deeply unfortunate accident. The problem, I think, is tonally, that's way darker than anything else the movie does by quite some way, and so it always sits not right with me, but only because it's so dark. That is such a horrible thing to happen.
It's also not well, and I don't know whether this is just my personal sensibility, but I don't think it's that funny either.
No,
I don't think it's a particularly funny choice. Like you say, it's just quite a dark, kind of harrowing choice,
right? And while it is effective in its shockingness, its shocking nature. I just don't think it's worth the tonal dissonance that you then get from that. And what's frustrating is one of my favourite jokes in the movie follows on from that, which is the amazing gag of, was it Snowball, the character that Scott Mosier plays with the beard, just getting in the ambulance casually, and then when they shut the ambulance door, he's just in the ambulance. They drive off with him. It's such an amazing joke, and it's so subtle, and it's so weird. Because it's Caitlin in the ambulance, then the body, which is covered, and then he's just sort of like looking around like, oh, what's going on here? And then he just gets in and sits down. And it's like, what's happening? It's so good, but it comes as a result of the scene. And it does also as well lead to one of my favourite lines in the movie, which is when Dante's having to recount his day to the police. She's like, what kind of convenience store are you running here?
Yeah.
It really does sum up how mad their day has been. So it's a real shame that those two jokes come as a result of this really unfortunate moment that I just think, again, just doesn't sit right. But again, I wouldn't say that's something that doesn't age well. I'd say it's something that I think should have been reconsidered on just a tonal ground. Is that fair?
Yeah. At the time, yeah. It feels almost like shocking for the sake of shocking.
Right.
Yeah. Whereas everything else feels more than that. Like in terms of the language, we touched briefly on. In general, there's a lot of people were also worried about the amount of curse words. Kevin Smith says.
I have a stat on that. Shall we quickly get that out? Like, where is it? It's
yeah.
I have the number of F-bombs or F-bomb derivatives in the movie.
Oh, go
on. 1 second. 91 times. Fuck and its derivatives are said 91 times throughout the movie. Mostly Dante and Jay.
That's brilliant. And he describes an early screening where he's watching it and was like, oh shit, there's a lot of language in this. There's a lot of cursing.
It's funny how sitting and watching something with an audience will make you reconsider choices.
There's a scene, though, where, for me, it's a great example of why this film is cleverer than maybe people would give it credit for.
Right.
So the scene where he's reeling off the porn titles where he's on the phone. So basically, the premise of the scene is someone comes in with a child and is like, "Have you got happy
Scrappy
title
It's
is.
called Happy Scrappy Pup.
Happy Scrappy Pup. Have you got Happy Scrappy Pup?" And Randall goes, "Oh, I'm just on the phone to the distribution house. Let me see if they've got it." And then he lists a load of horrific porn film titles. Well, and apparently there's a bit.
I feel like increasingly horrific as well. Like it's like the first couple are
well,
really subtle, and then they get worse. And there is actual real world reason for that, but it's very funny.
Yes, yeah, well, I can say that because I was going to slip that in here. So basically, Jeff Anderson, who plays Randall, went up to Kevin Smith and went, "Look, I mean, are we not, do we have to go so far with this? Like, is this not crazy? Should we not tone it down a little bit?" And Kevin Smith goes, "Okay, yeah, you're right." And he goes, give me the list." And he gives him the list. And then just before shooting the scene, he goes, "Right, here's the list back." And Kevin Smith has added 3 titles to the list.
Yeah. and they get progressively. The reason they get progressively worse though and start simple and subtle is because Jeff Anderson, in the end, once he saw the new list, refused to do the scene in the same shot and room as the child. So what they had to do, and the reason the camera pushes in on Randall as he does the list and then cuts to an even closer shot of him, is because the last half of that list he refused to say in front of the actual child. So they actually had to shoot it in a way where he could get away with doing it with her not being in the room, and they did that sort of tight mid on his like shoulders and head for the last sort of half of the list. And that's why that happens, because even though he then got the list, he and was like, "Okay, I guess I'm doing this," he still refused to, bless him, do it in front of the child, which I think is actually very admirable. I think that's fair.
Yeah, I just assumed, I didn't know that bit. I just assumed that like that child. I assumed watching it, that child wasn't there for any of it. Like that's crazy. Because how late?
I'm actually going to give myself. I'm going to give myself a tick there, because one thing that I did when I put the trivia together, I was thinking, God, I hope I have at least one piece of trivia Chris doesn't know.
Yes, no, I didn't know that second.
There you go, tick. No. I've won. Let me know when I'm going through the actual trivia later if any of those are new to you.
But what I was going to say about the thing is, for me, the humour of that scene, and for some people maybe it will just be the list, but for me, the humour of that scene comes from the casualness in which he's doing it. I'm on the phone to the distribution house, just give me a second. The fact that he thinks the character thinks it's appropriate to do it, and the beat at the end of, "Oh, I'm sorry, what was your title?" And the reason I bring it up, sorry.
No, go on. I have a question for you about this scene.
The reason I bring it up in the context of the language, if you compare it to, there are scenes in Afterlife, which I've got friends that love that show, and I just think as a piece of writing, I'm not a huge fan of Afterlife. There is a scene in Afterlife where Ricky Gervais has 2 like obnoxious characters list off a load of nicknames for someone, and then they come back in a later season and do it again. And in that instance, in my opinion, if memory serves, I'd maybe have to rewatch the scene to say for sure. But in that instance, the joke is, here's a load of rude names, here's a load of rude things, and that get progressively more and more extreme. That's the entirety of the joke. It's amazing to me how in 1994, you know, or did it come out in 94, whatever, like in the early 90s, Kevin Smith is writing something with a little bit more nuance than that. Yes, that is part of the joke, and for some people that will be the entire joke, but it does have that extra layer of the fact that Randall is so casual about it, and that beat at the end of, "Oh, what was your title?"
Well,
and it's just more than that.
There's potentially another layer as well, which is what I want to ask you your thoughts on, Chris, and the reason I nearly interrupted you, because I'm desperate to know. Do you suspect, as I do, that Randall doesn't need any of those movies at all, but hates the customers? That hates the customers so much that what we're learning about his character, he gets so frustrated when someone has the absolute gall to ask him to do something for them that his little way of punishing them for that choice is to deliberately upset in a way.
Yeah, I'm not even sure he's on the phone to anyone in that
correct.
scene.
I also wondered this, so I'm glad you see it that way too. Because when you think about that scene in the context of there's the other scene where there's a lady that, because one of the key things about this movie and one of the things it comes to, and one of the things that makes this movie so relatable is questions from customers, stupid questions from customers, or just like make your own decision. Like, I'm not here to do that for you. Sort of like I push the buttons, as Randall says later in the movie. You know, why are you asking me which movie is better? I can't tell you that. Like, I can give you my personal opinion, and I will do out of politeness in my, but like, well, he won't. But like a normal clerk would do that out of politeness, but it's not really supposed to be their job, right? And there's that scene earlier in the movie where the lady's like, "Are any of these movies good?" And he's like, "I don't know. I don't watch movies." Because he just doesn't want to deal with her. And then she does a thing where she's like, well, how about these two movies, but it's the same too? And he's like, oh, those ones suck. And she's like, it's the same movie. And he's like, oh, I don't appreciate your ruse, ma'am. Your cunning attempt to trick me. And she's like, what? He's like, hope you feel good about yourself. And it's like, you realize that actually that whole interaction was just him like dangling a toy over a cat. Like, he knew exactly what he was doing at all times in that scene. Everything was deliberate. Everything was chosen. Because the way he gets by and the way he isn't, oh, I'm not even supposed to be here today, is because he just has fun with it. His own version of whatever that is. And it's part of it's winding up the customers that ask stupid questions. And I think what's interesting about the Happy Scrappy scene is, you're right, it's working on about 4 or 5 different levels, because that final level is, and I'm not even sure it's real. That is a credit to what this movie's biggest strength is, which is absolutely the writing, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
That
and
it was shot in '93, by the way. I double checked, just curiosity.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
The writing, and I think its other strength, is the many, many appearances of Walt Flanagan. Which made me laugh so much.
Walt has like 4, maybe 5 roles in the movie, all different, and they're all great. They're all really good.
So he's the guy looking for eggs. He's the guy Dan referenced earlier, complaining about the language. And basically the reason for that is people just weren't turning up to do it. But Walt was always there.
Stick a different hat on Walt, guys. He's going again.
Which you really, and again, that's something I noticed more on this one because I'm more sort of familiar with Walt Flanagan now, so I was able to spot it more. And I'm like, oh, it's Walt again.
I love that Mosier has 2 roles in this movie, but one clearly shot like after he'd clean shaven, so it's like looks like a completely different guy. So obviously Scott Mosier plays the snowball guy, the guy with the beard that's kind of like that always seems to be high and just sort of stumbling about the place. And then there's also like a disgruntled customer while they're playing the hockey game. That's also Scott Mosier, and they even interact with each other. Which is really fun.
He describes it as the movie's only special effect, which is Scott talking to himself.
It's a great moment.
Turn up, so they were like, "Well, we're just shave Scott."
I honestly think that's what that performance that Scott Mosier gives, particularly as the bearded guy, the snowball guy, so good because it's so weird. Like it's a weird character, and he gives it such like personality. I don't know. There's just I just love that character a lot. That character makes me laugh almost every single minute he's on screen. Every second he's on screen, I'm usually laughing.
In general, it's amazing, and there was they did think this through. People that were originally earmarked for roles, Kevin Smith changed that, but. In general, given the scenario in which this was being made, the acting is really strong. Better than it has any right to be.
Yeah, I think he met some
given the circumstances.
It's a mixture of his friends and people he met on an acting course at community college. Like it's mad. It's really mad. I think only 2 people in the cast of 50 actually had prior credits.
Even like Jeff Anderson, who Jeff Anderson didn't go to the. Jeff Anderson just went to the auditions because he was like, "Oh, there might be attractive women there." Like he didn't go to audition. He just ended up reading it to like help out. And Kevin Smith was like, "No, I think you're Randall." And his performance is brilliant.
Well, I mean, and
that's insane.
That links into a little piece of trivia as well, because the original intention for Smith when he wrote the film was for himself to play Randall, which is why he gives Randall all the best lines, in his words. And then, you know, Jeff Anderson sort of ended up sort of swiping that role from the director. And I think to a certain degree as well, I think Kevin probably realised it was going to be a lot of work to be in front of the camera all of the time at that level.
Yeah, he says that. And apparently they went through the entire script, and at the end of it, Kevin Smith went, you know, I think it should be you. I think you're Randall. And Jeff Anderson was like, you shouldn't do that. Like, Jeff Anderson was like, this is a mistake. And Kevin Smith talked him into it. There's a great bit of the documentary where Jeff Anderson is like, and that was the first instance of Kevin talking me into doing it.
The first of three. I have this impression, and I think I got this impression from Kevin, that Jeff Anderson just lives in the mountains, and every now and then comes down from the mountains to make a Clerks movie, and then back up to his castle, his shack on a hill where he herds goats.
There was a Smodcast episode where it's, I think for some reason it's Scott Mosier and Jeff Anderson, and they talk about that. Jeff Anderson's like, I'm the youngest here by about 20 years, but, you know, yeah.
Jeff Anderson is, I think, and look, and I don't want to, you know, detract from Brian O'Halloran, who brings a lot to Dante's sort of whiny character in terms of the layers and stuff, and it's a brilliant performance as well. But Jeff Anderson's the star of the movie. Like he's the one that stands out. Like he's the one that in that old sort of like stereotype. You know, when Randall's on the screen, you're thinking, great, Randall's on the screen, and when he's not, you're thinking, where's Randall? It's that, like, he's such it's such a brilliantly written and performed character, and it really is like a culmination of these two things meeting, and it's just such a perfect marriage of writing and performance. That character is so, I don't know. There is something genius about that. There is some magic happening there. What that secret sauce is, whatever that balance is of like performance and writing, I don't know. But it's exactly right, and it's just so good and so satisfying. And even when he came back to do it on second occasion, at some point maybe we'll cover that too. I think likely we'll cover that too at some point. But I was worried it wouldn't really work the second time. Randall is still the best thing about Clerks 2, if memory serves.
Yeah, he's really great, but I think the casting decision of Dante is a really great one. Like, yes. So I don't know if you came across this in the research, but Kevin Smith basically had two school friends, one of whom ended up playing the guy who basically says to Dante that he's
Rick
out
Darris.
of shape.
The character is Rick Darris.
Yeah, and so that actor was meant to play Dante, but he didn't. He'd had the script for months and hadn't learnt the lines. And in general, he was playing it a bit too cool, a bit too sure of himself. So the decision to there's a huge making a movie with your friends element to this movie, but there is also, you kind of can't deny Scott Mosier and Kevin Smith's ability to go, right, but we do have to make the right decisions for the movie,
right? Which
is, Kevin going, oh, I shouldn't play Randall, and actually saying that that guy isn't right for Dante, and that must have been hard, like essentially turning to a mate that you'd promised the part and going, nah, you don't have it now. And what's even more of a kick in the teeth is the original pitch was that he'd play Randall, and then another mate of theirs was going to be Silent Bob, but obviously when Kevin Smith decided he didn't want to play Randall, he took Silent Bob. So it's like, it's real, yeah.
It's like a musical chairs, all just sort of cascades down. And you're right though. There is a dedication to making a good movie. There is a dedication to actually ensuring the movie's as good as it can be, to the point of being willing to like make those sorts of hard decisions when it comes to your mates, and that's something that's not normally a problem because we're talking about a film industry. They're jobs. People get and lose jobs all the time. People interview for things they do not get in the sort of normal world, like outside of like movie making, and then in movie making the same thing happens, and that's just kind of understood as a part of the process, right person for the job, ideally, not your best mates. But the Kevin Smith presumably pitched this to a lot of his friends as, we're all going to make a movie and it'll be fun, and then had to like actually put the film first. And you're right, and that is brave. While we're on the subject of the filmmaking itself, though, let's talk about some of the stuff that doesn't work so much. So obviously, the film stock gets damaged in multiple places. There are track lines through some of the movie, scratches that even on the most recent digital re-releases of this movie are still there because they clearly were not very careful with the film stock while editing, and that's fine. But it gives the movie a bit of a textured feel, but it also makes the movie feel like it was edited in the way it was edited, which is like in a back room with not a lot of room and not a lot of space to actually deal with the celluloid properly. So it wasn't treated very well, and therefore the movie has a lot of unintentional scratches and marks and problems, and you see that cropping up all over the place. But that's fine. It gives the movie character. Then in terms of the filming, clear that some of this is through limitation, but there are a lot of scenes where two things are supposed to be happening at the same time, and they feel like they were shot on different days because there's no establishing shot of them happening in the same space. For example, the egg scene, they're not reacting in a convincing way that you believe they shot Walter Flanagan's stuff the other end of the store on the same day. They feel like they were shot a week apart. They just feel it from the choice of camera angles to the performances. Not really, they're clearly not reacting to each other. Well, I should say, actually, the Walter Flanagan, the egg guy, is obviously not reacting very deliberately to them, but they're not reacting to him. Like, there's a point at the end where he, like, slams the egg into the thing, and they cut back to a shot of Dante and Randall who do not react to that at all. They're just as if they've not seen that, and it just gives it away that they weren't shot at the same time. And then because of the limitations of the space, I understand that the quick stop was a small space, which actually gives the movie a really cool claustrophobic feel. Because inside the quick stop is always these tight angles and stuff. And that really adds to the film. But the downside is you then don't get the ability to do like establishing shots that give you the spacing of it. So them looking down the aisle at the egg guy from where they're stood, it just doesn't feel like these two things are occupying the same space at the same time. And that is a small microcosm of a wider issue in the movie about that as well, where there are lots of like insert shots that just feel like they were very clearly shot on different days, different times, and it just doesn't have the vibe that it's actually happening at the same time. And I don't know if some of that, I think, comes down to sound editing, because you cut to a different shot, but you've got the sound from the original shot still playing, so it looks more like an insert shot. Whereas I think if they'd made the sound shift around a little bit more, so it sounded like the other conversation was happening in the background, you might have created more of the impression that the conversation was happening on the other side of the store. Like there's a scene when they're talking about Star Wars, maybe. They've got insert shots of Jason Mewes stealing food, I think. But the sound is the sound from the camera shooting the Star Wars conversation. I think what I might have been tempted to do to make it feel like it was happening in the same place is have the sound of Jay also playing, and then lower the sound of the Star Wars conversation so you can still hear it, but it sounds like we've cut to a camera that's on the other side of the store and that conversation is still happening. And you're hearing it from that camera's background rather than the way they do it. There's a few little things like that make the movie feel. I don't like using the word amateurish, but it does give away the way the movie was made. And there are a handful of moments like that where I just think, from a filmmaking perspective, the reality is kind of blown by very tiny editing and filmmaking choices. And you forgive all of that, I will say. But I'd be remiss if I didn't bring them up. And they're smattered throughout the movie, moments like that, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and it's like you say, it's a victim of how they had to do some of this stuff. Yeah. But there are definitely choices there that in hindsight they might have changed that you notice. But I think, like you said as well, it all rolls in with the aesthetic of the film so nicely that none of these things become jarring enough to hamper enjoyment.
No, I don't think so. But I mean, some of them could have probably been a little bit eased in editing, or maybe a little bit more thought put into it on the day. But yeah, I think on the whole, yeah, most of it is very forgivable, very understandable, not really an issue. Obviously, and there is some stuff that's studio stuff, so obviously, the really bad dubbing of one of the last lines of the movie always stands out as being absolutely dreadful. The "Here comes Randall, he's a berserker." The way that line has been dubbed over because he sang an actual jingle there, the Wrangler jingle, which they didn't have the rights to, so they had to dub that in. Here's the thing with that. That's fine. You legally had to do it, but could you have at least not made it sound like he was in a room saying it and not in a recording studio? Like, put the mic a little further away from him. Because it sounds suddenly like a guy talking into a microphone, like he's doing a podcast.
Do we know when that was done then? Was that done after Miramax took it over
I
and
believe
said,
so.
right, well, you can't have this in it? Yeah.
Yeah, I believe so. So it was done. It was done much later. But the answer is to not put the microphone right in his face. And I know that's tempting.
Yeah. Of course, though, Dan. Well, now we're treading on Triv here, but it's a really logical place to tread on it. You got to admit that overdubbing and him leaving the store with that little dance, and then the movie ending, is better than Dante getting shot and killed, which was the original ending of the film.
So, for a little bit of context, Kevin Smith completes the movie himself, organises a screening for himself. No one attends, or just his friends attend, and he kind of thinks the movie's done, right? And he's like, "Oh well, I just blew all of my money on a thing that no one's ever going to see." Then they, I think the script got into some hands, and there was then talk of it screening. I remember hearing a story that a guy at Miramax read the script before seeing the movie.
So I don't know that bit, but they basically got into it. It was in a film festival, and no one had, like you say, no one attended any of the screenings except this one guy who, and they were like, there was some guy in the corner, but that guy turned out to be Bob Hawke, who's quite a well-known figure in the industry. So he started sharing it round, and Amy Tavern and a few other people started asking for copies of the film. Mm-hmm. And then basically it winds its way to John Peterson, who is the one that goes on to push through the sale with Mark Tusk's help.
Right.
I watched the documentary last night.
I think it was.
In case anyone's like, "Fuck it out," he's got a lot of recall for these names.
There was someone from Miramax that basically that saw the script, and apparently the story goes that they stopped. So there was here we go. So a Miramax employee read the screenplay to determine if the company wished to pick up the film for distribution. The reader came to the scene where Dante, angry over his girlfriend's sexual past, yells at the customer, "My girlfriend sucked 37 dicks," and the customer replies, "In a row?" He laughed so hard he stopped reading the script, immediately visited Vice President of Production, and had him read the scene too. The VP lit the film. The VP greenlit the film for buying approval on the spot, is what this says. I don't know if I'd buy that part though, because that gels with the other story that I've heard. But I do believe that the Miramax employee probably did read the script and stop at that moment though.
Yeah, and they could have done their bit. Like, there's presumably a chain that leads to Shudder, Harvey Weinstein, but the movie definitely gets sold at Sundance in a restaurant after the final screening.
This is then the story, is the movie rags to riches, after a few failed, no one sees it sort of things. It starts to pick up buzz because the script and these VHS copies that Kevin Smith and Mosier produced themselves and sent out to studios start going round, and eventually there's these Sundance screenings that lead to Miramax ultimately picking it up.
Yeah, because so going back to the ending, there's John Peterson, who was basically taken on to try and sell the film. He in the so if anyone's interested, it's a 90-minute documentary called Snowball Effect, and it's on YouTube. And the voicemails play, and the first one is like, "I watched your movie," and it's basically him going, "Yeah, I don't think there's or he said in a conversation with him after, "I don't think there's a place for I think you're too early, so I don't think we can sell this." And then there's another voicemail that's like, "Yeah, I've watched it again. I keep watching this film. That has to mean something." And then there's another voicemail where he's like, "I've had a thought vis-a-vis your ending." And that is him basically, and apparently a lot of other people had also said this, but that's him basically turning to Kevin and going, "You have to take off that ending. Just end the movie when he leaves the store."
Well, what's really interesting is I believe the screenings at Sundance had the ending, had the
they did,
and it was Miramax, who were notorious at the time for editing movies without the filmmaker's consent, actually did not force the choice on Kevin in the end. And Chris already said, but the ending is, it's on the Clerks X, the 10-year anniversary DVD, and it's a lot. it's a really tonally problem. It's tonally, it fits with the necrophilia movie they were making also. Do you know what I mean? Like, it fits perfectly with the Caitlyn scene, which we've already said doesn't fit in the movie. But it's this weird ending where it very much, and Kevin Smith has admitted this, feels like I don't know how to end my movie, so I'm just going to kill the main character. After Randall leaves, Dante's on his own. He's turning off, and there's a whole subplot that was cut from the movie when the ending was cut about the security cameras not working. Being on the fritz. That's on the Clerks 10 DVD as well if you want to watch those extra scenes, but they're not particularly interesting. But basically, that sets up the ending of the movie, which is this guy comes in to rob the store and ends up shooting Dante, the guy that wasn't supposed to be there that day. And it's kind of supposed to be like dramatic irony or whatever. But Miramax didn't actually outright say, you have to remove the ending for us to pick this up, which was shocking for them at the time. And basically, Kevin made the choice himself based on the fact that a lot of people had brought it up. And I guess his own feelings on it by the end. They didn't think it fit with the rest of the movie, and in the end, they've said since, apparently, they were relieved that he did choose to remove the ending, which is fair, I think.
I just think thematically it ends, and like I say, I really noticed this on this rewatch. Thematically, it ends so beautifully and it's so real. Like, not just the argument and everything that Randall says to Dante, but the fact that after the argument they clean up and they don't have a big "I'm sorry." They don't have a big, reconciliation. They literally just tidy away. And Randall's like, after you've done your thing, Dante says what he's going to do tomorrow, and Randall says, "You want to meet up for food after?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure." Like, and it's just so real. It's so that release of, like, once you've said all the shit and had the argument, you don't actually need to, do a big apology. And it's so earnest, and I think it is so, like a play. And I just think you don't need, like, thematically, you've wrapped everything up. You don't need the thematic wrapping up of the killing. And I'm gonna let you speak, Dan, while I nip to the loo, because I was hoping to see this through, and I need to pee, Dan.
That's fine.
I apologise.
That's okay. I think you're right, and I think what's interesting about that as well is I think in real life, often we're in that weird situation where, like, we've had that debate with someone, but what we're looking for is to genuinely believe that they're sorry. It's not about hearing the words necessarily. It's about feeling that sincere apology, forgive me for bringing up the cursed words that thou shalt not speak. But there's one of the Harry Potter books, I think it's Goblet of Fire. Harry and Ron fall out in the early section of the book, and Harry keeps insisting he needs an apology. And then when Ron approaches him later in the movie and indicates through another sentence that he now gets it, the book says suddenly Harry didn't need to hear the words "I'm sorry" or something like that, and when Ron goes to apologize, he's like, "Don't worry about it." And it's a brilliant moment, and it's very, very human, because I do think that happens. I think that happens a lot in real life when people are having debates, that actually, when we force the words "I'm sorry" into the situation, sometimes it's because we don't necessarily believe the person really is sorry, so you want to hear it. Whereas I think in a real, genuine friendship, sometimes, if you actually know enough about the person or know enough about the circumstances to understand they get it, you don't need to hear it. And I think that's what's so beautiful about the ending of this movie, is after all of that, Dante understands that Randall was trying to help, whether he did or didn't, debatable, and that his speech, his character destruction of Dante, the whole speech that sort of pulls Dante's entire worldview apart, was for his own good. It's what Dante needed to hear.
Yeah, I think so.
And so suddenly he doesn't need to hear "I'm sorry" because we had a fight. Like it, and that is again, as you said, it's just so human and so honest, and very. And we've talked about in the past, when we've seen episodes of TV shows and stuff we reviewed, and we've gone, God, it really feels like the characters needed a moment of reconciliation. And for anyone going, wait a minute, why do they not need to do it here? And they do that here. They just do it in a different way. In a way where you understand that the two characters have reconciled without actually having the conversation, and that's a very tricky thing to pull off, and not many screenplays can do that. But again, the dialogue of Kevin Smith and the performances of these two actors sell all that, and you believe it, and that's fine. And it's about selling me on that. And when we question it and go, oh God, I wish there'd been a moment of reconciliation with these characters, it's because they didn't do a good enough job setting up the unsaid apology thing that this movie does. If you're going to do that, that's also a thing you need to do and choose to do and enact correctly, and that's hard. That's I think it takes really top tier writing and filmmaking and performances to sell that. And like, considering it wasn't supposed to be the ending of the movie, it was written as this is just a random scene. Like, I would not tell someone they were wrong if they said they felt the ending of this movie was abrupt. But let me tell you, they fucking nail it. It's so good, and you're right. It is the perfect ending to the movie. It's just like, would you go again tomorrow? Yeah, because that is the life of a clerk.
For sure.
So yeah, big thumbs up for that.
First of all, I've not peed yet. Jess is cleaning the bathroom, so there's some toilet cleaner down there. Just to add that jeopardy and explain why in 15 minutes time I'm like, I need to pee. So I've not, listeners, no, I don't know. Don't think too much about me needing to pee. Don't worry. You're listening to this in the future. I will have peed. But my second point, Dan, because we've not really talked about this element. Huh?
No, well, wait a second. This episode is going to be going up in November, at the end of November. November 28th.
Yeah, I'd have peed. Yeah, I'd have peed a lot. I don't want people sat there worried about the fact that I'm talking.
We're recording this in August. You better have fucking peed before November.
Yeah, I'm willing. Look, I'm willing to go out on a limb and say I'd have peed a few times by the time people are listening to this.
Okay, good.
A big element of the film we've not talked about yet. But I'm keen to get views on. It's obviously, I don't think anyone would watch this film and go, oh well, the things that are going to get the characters that are going to get spun off and become the franchise are obviously Jay and Silent Bob. Let's talk about Jay and Silent Bob, Dan. What do you think of Jason Mewes' performance and the writing of that character in particular? What are your thoughts on Jay and Silent Bob based on Clerks?
Yeah, they're interesting, aren't they? Because I think in this particular movie, they serve a really particular function. And I think when you look at Jay and Silent Bob's usage in other movies, it's a bit hit and miss whether they actually need to be there or not. But this movie, the first movie those characters appear, they are very deliberately there for a very good reason. And they are there to shine a light on Dante's worldview. He looks down on Jay. And that is highlighting his character's weird idea that there's something noble and lofty about his job. He's artificially done that because he does feel he's better than it, but he also wants to elevate that so he doesn't feel so low about himself, which is a feeling we've all had, I think, in our lives, where we've artificially sort of in our heads made our jobs seem more important than they are, just so we don't feel like we're pissing away our years. And I think Dante's doing that, and I think Jay's design as a character is to highlight that, because there's this brilliant moment towards the end of the movie where Jay is quote-unquote clocking out for the night of his job of drug dealer, which is a really funny running joke in the movie, that he's clearly dealing drugs, but he's pretending like he's just hanging out. It's great. It's one of my favourite elements of the movie. Like later when he's like, I'm not dealing drugs, and then the guy comes over and is like, hey, you got the stuff? And they do the deal directly in front of Dante. But then he's like, I like the idea, he's like, we're clocking out. Like, yeah, I've done my drug dealing for the day. And it's time to go party, which I love. But they have that conversation, and he's just like, yeah, we should hang out sometime. And Dante's like, yeah, I don't really think we should. And it's like, Jay's like, oh, because I'm a drug dealer, you think you're better than me. And it's like, actually, I'm not sure he is better than you, and I don't think he's figured that out yet. Like, we're all just getting by in whatever way we know how, right? They're probably, and it's probably one of the smartest things they've ever written for Jay. She's saying something, but it's a really interesting moment that shines such a light on Dante as a character, and it's not often Jay and Silent Bob aren't just comic relief, you know. And the whole shtick with Silent Bob being silent until he says the one thing is really interesting, because that is another happy accident, because that line was actually supposed to be Jay's, and Jason Mewes
just couldn't deliver it right.
He couldn't deliver it right. He kept forgetting the lines. And you can even tell in the bit before that of the speech, there's a bit where he's like, oh, shit, no, I fucked up. And then he says it again. And they kept it in the movie. And you just know that's a legit, like, him saying to the camera, oh, shit, I fucked up. Let me try again. And saying it again. But he does it in just a subtle, quick way that you can make it sound like it's the character forgetting where he was going and saying it again. And it feels that, again, is another one of those, like, capturing magic on camera sort of moments of, like, it feels really honest. And then you got this situation where, like, Kevin gets to deliver the line, and it becomes the routine of, like, Jay and Silent Bob, silent until, like, the end of the movie when he has his big speech where he says his really powerful thing. And that starts here. And I think they're used really well in this movie, because they both serve as comic relief and as shining a pretty sharp light on the main character and his prejudice almost. Yeah,
they play with that. No, you're fine. Rant away. I asked you the question. And they play with that trope of Bob giving the big speech at the end in quite interesting ways in later movies as well. Mm-hmm. They sort of start to change that up. But the way it's done here, like you say, is so perfect. It's such a brilliant happy accident, because he just really, it's like he cuts through, because you can tell as well that it fits so nicely with what Jay has just said that you can tell. And I've had, again, before, when I guess I've been paying, not thinking of it, not watching it to review it, where it feels like Bob's thing comes out of nowhere. But the groundwork is really laid in what Jay says. He's saying the same thing, but Silent Bob just cuts through all the shit, basically, and just makes the point so eloquently with the lasagna thing. And it's really effective. And I think Jason Mewes, whilst, you know, some of his dialogue and stuff has not aged brilliantly, specifically the F word, which we talked about earlier. Yep. For someone that had no experience and was so nervous that they didn't even film the dance scene in front of other people, he's doing a great job. Like, he is really great in the movie. Like I said, I was so impressed by the performances across the board on this rewatch. I agree. And I think, you know, what's really interesting as well is, like, from a character perspective, Dante, like, is actually, he brings it on himself, but there is something tragic about what his character goes through, where he's got these two women that he clearly feels something for, but different things, and he thinks he chooses one, but then loses her, tries to go back to the other, but she finds out about the other choice, and he ends up with, you know, neither woman, you know, to put in Archie terms. Yeah, and he doesn't even, because of what Bob says, I don't think he goes back to her in a, oh, well, if I can't have I'll go for her way. Like, Silent Bob makes him realise he was being a dick.
Right. And that's the tragedy of it, though. But at that point, he's already made a choice that's ruined his chance for that. Without realising it, he's already set into motion events that will end that relationship. And by making a selfish choice for himself, which he, again, as Randall points out, and this is what's so clever about the script, it's all stuff he chose to do himself. He makes all of these choices. The fact that he's there when he's not supposed to be there today, he chose to come in. He could have said no on that phone call at the start of that day, and his day would have played out very differently. He'd have got to play hockey. The whole Veronica Caitlin thing might have played out completely differently. Like, it's you know, he's really the maker of his own. But that's what's so tragic about it. By the time he realizes that he does love Veronica, it's too late. He's already blown that. And that's the tragedy of that character is so good.
Speaking of the beginning, why do we think he's sleeping in the closet?
I think because they wanted it to seem like he lived that's a trope from the time, isn't it? Like, the person wakes up and you get their morning routine and they're like gross and I don't have any fresh cutlery, so I'm going to eat my cereal out of this. And it's a weird thing, and and I sleep in my closet because they were trying to make him look schlubbly. I think it doesn't really play. I don't think, in my opinion. I honestly, the part of me thinks the audio of the phone call should have been played over opening credits, and we should have opened on the store. So just the audio just the audio. So it's coming up, Clerks, directed by, starring, and you're hearing, what do you mean? No, I just closed last night. No, I'm not going to come in. You promise you'll be there by 12? You promise? Like, that conversation is just playing over that without the visuals, and then we cut in on the store and him arriving at the store. That's, I think, way better. It's not a great opening scene.
I'm going to try and pee again, Dan, while you wrap up. Any other notes, any final thoughts before we go into truth?
Yeah, well, God, there's probably... Oh, yeah, the title cards. Let's talk very briefly about the title cards. I think they're pretentious, and I don't care for them. They don't need to be there. It's the sort of thing a film student thinks is cool and edgy or, like, interesting, and it isn't. And it's another thing about the movie I would change, but at the same time, again, not a big enough issue in the wake of the film's the strengths that it bothers me too much. Like, I don't care that I end up seeing Dante come out of that cupboard. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. Could that have been done better? I think so. Like, the way I'd suggest it, I think, personally, would have been maybe a little cleaner. But, I'm not walking around going, don't watch the movie, he comes out of a closet. Or don't watch the movie, there are some pretentious title cards. None of that is a big enough issue for me. I also don't care for the View Askew logo. I find it weird and uncomfortable every time I see it. I don't know what it's trying to say. I don't know what its point is. And again, it feels like a sort of edgy young person being like, look at what we're doing. On the more positive notes, I'd just like to note all the different things the movie does to observe the frustrations of working in retail and with customers. The anti-smoking guy, which is a very common issue in retail, where people work on the assumption that somehow the clerk is responsible for the thing that's being sold. So as someone who's worked in supermarkets and cinemas and things, people blaming you for the product is remarkable. Like the way they blame Dante for the smoking, and the fact that smoking kills is insane. But it's no more insane than when someone at the cinema gets mad because they didn't like the movie, and they blame the staff as if Brad Pitt's downstairs making them. Like, it's fucking weird. I've never understood that. The other one that they bring up, which I think is really good, and it's just a very common thing, is people trying to demean you on the grounds that as a clerk, you're perceived as having a low status job. So they're not happy with some element of the service, and they demean that that's what you're doing. And it's like, well, without me, you wouldn't get your stupid coffee or your whatever it is you're buying. So, that's a very common one. Talking about pop culture to pass the days is another very relatable thing. These jobs can be so mundane that, like, that is a very common thing that people do in their job. So it's another relatable sort of observation that the movie makes on that lifestyle. Also, this is the last time I rent here, which is another classic of a customer who assumes the person serving them gives a shit if they ever return. And I always find that very funny because they absolutely do not, categorically do not care that you come back. In fact, if anything, that's a relief that they hear you're not coming back. Then obviously the customers with stupid questions as well. Do you have any new movies? Big sign behind them, new movies. Also extremely relatable. And as this is all summed up by Jeff Anderson's, this job would be great if it wasn't for the fucking customers.
Let's to zero in on the pop culture thing. First of all, Dan, I muted you. You happier?
Yes.
You happy
for
with that?
Those
feel good about
for
that?
those of you who won't be aware of this, on a recent podcast, Chris didn't mute me while he went to the toilet, and while I didn't hear him peeing, I did hear flushing and moving around, and it made it really hard for me to talk while he was doing it because I'm easily distracted. So yes. I appreciate that, Chris. It also actually gave me a clue when you were back, because I then heard it unmute and was like, oh, Chris is about to come back, so I knew to wrap up. So it's actually worked on. It was more useful than I imagined it would be. So there you go.
Although there was a moment earlier when instead of unmuting you, I took you off my headphones. So listeners earlier, when I first tried to pee, might have had a sudden moment where they could hear both, like, Dan echoing, and that would be why. The pop culture thing's interesting because obviously Kevin Smith has such a reputation for incorporating pop culture in his work.
Yeah, it's just one scene.
And that always seems to stem back to Clerks. But other than the Star Wars scene, which is great and a great exploration of pop culture. Basically that, and I think that scene alone would make someone that's really into that stuff really engage with this movie, because never before would we have seen the minutiae discussions that people actually have about these things. So there's a scene where they talk about Star Wars, and they drill into the weeds of the second Death Star would have probably had contractors working on it, and so it's even shittier that it got blown up, etc. And like, it's a great example of the type of conversations that people actually have. And obviously now people are having those conversations on podcasts and YouTube videos and stuff. But in the 90s, people were having those conversations by themselves, and that wouldn't have been reflected on screen anywhere. But it is just that one scene. Like, it's amazing how, like, Mallrats does it a whole bunch. But, like, it's amazing how that reputation seems to start right from the off, even though actually it's just that one particularly brilliant and therefore remembered scene.
Yeah, no, agreed. I think it's not a huge part of, like, this movie at all, and it's remembered for that. And I think the scene that the movie does have is, I think it speaks to how iconic that scene is, that people think of that as being a big part of this movie, when actually there's only really one scene where pop culture is discussed in any detail, and that's that one. I don't know if you agreed with me on the title cards being pretentious.
Yes, I do agree with that. I don't think it's necessary, and I don't think Kevin Smith said he based it on the seven. Is it the 7 cycles of hell?
It's actually one of the first things in the in my trivia. Clerks is loosely based on the Divine Comedy, hence the name of the protagonist, because it was by Dante Alighieri. I don't know how to pronounce that. Also, there are 9 breaks in the movie which represent the 9 rings of hell.
I just don't think that stuff is overt enough to warrant the title cards and
or
stuff.
Or interesting enough, because or interesting enough though, because even if that's true, what does that mean for anything that's in this movie? It's again pretentious, not unneeded. Last quick note, I do love the recurring joke of "you open," even though the sign outside says "I assure you we're open." That is just a very honest observation about working with customers and in a service industry. I wanted to compliment very briefly as well how the women in this movie are written, because it's, considering the movie is obviously from the perspective of 2 male characters, and that's not going to change because it's written by a guy, directed by a guy. I get all that. The 2 women who are in it are not just there to be objects or story beats for the lead. Veronica makes her own choices. Caitlin makes her own choices. And particularly Veronica's speech at the end and not falling for his, "but I love you," is such a brilliant moment. And such a great moment. I'm so glad she doesn't choose that, because 1, it leads to more tragedy for Dante, which is always sort of one of the themes of these movies. But particularly, I think what's great about that is it just shows that she is an independent and capable character. The movie doesn't pass the Bechdel test, but the Bechdel test is not a perfect system for defining whether a movie writes its women well. But particularly, I like that both women seem to have strong perspectives of their own. They don't just exist to service the men in the story. So I think that's good.
Yeah, I'd agree. Are we ready, Dan?
One last thing. Sorry, very quickly. I've just realised I haven't talked about this. Randall's introduction is fucking immaculate. The way he shows up and you think he's a customer, or the first time you watch it, you're supposed to think he's a customer, and then it turns out he works there. It's so good. It's just wanted to compliment that moment.
I always wish we saw more of it. I want to see more of that woman's reaction to him when he then goes into the store.
Yeah. It's great. If you've got a character like Randall, it's such an entertaining part of the movie. To introduce him in such a clever way as well, such a fun way, is just brilliant. Really good writing, good stuff, and good performance. Yeah, win-win. Right, you can do it, Chris.
Let's trim it up.
I'm gonna give you some trivia. So, if there's any trivia in here, Chris, that you haven't heard before, do let me know. Ding a little imaginary bell. I'm curious. We'll start with the one that we know you definitely know, because you'll have heard it 1,000 times before, which is during the Harry Potter movies, Daniel Radcliffe went through 160 pairs of glasses. I couldn't resist. I'm sorry. I did it. That was good.
Very nice.
I'm proud of that one. I liked that. I planned that. Now, we usually talk about alternate castings, Chris, when we do these. So did you know that Brad Pitt was originally going to play Dante? No, I'm kidding. It's weird because this is the first movie we've done in a while where we haven't had some wild alternate castings. Did you know Will Smith was nearly Randall? Like usually you hear these sort of things. We don't have any of those this week. And with the ones we did have, we've already talked about, which is that some of Kevin Smith's friends and that group swapped around what roles they were going to play, including obviously Kevin Smith not ending up playing Randall. So at film school,
it might be worth slipping in there that because basically they went to a local acting school to ask for audition and stuff, and when Marilyn Gallotti, whose name I may have pronounced wrong, auditioned, they were all blown away by the fact that she could cry on cue.
Yes, yes, this is a good piece of trivia. Yes, that one's not in my list. Funnily enough, didn't make it. I was trying to keep it short because I knew I didn't, because this is one of those movies that we were in danger of massively overrunning on, so I kept that one short. But yeah, so Smith and Mosier, so Kevin Smith, Scott Mosier ended up producing this movie when they were in film school together in Vancouver. They'd made a pact that whichever of them first started directing a movie, I think maybe it was whoever finished a script first, the other one would produce it while that person would direct it. So when Kevin finished this film first, Mosier then agreed to produce it. And it actually started a partnership that lasted for many years. And still, did Mosier produce as recently as Clerks 3, or has Mosier moved away from that stuff now? I actually don't know.
No, Mosier's just sold a film, I think, with Angelina Jolie. He directed the Grinch movie,
yes,
which came out the other Christmas, but he hasn't produced... He hasn't done anything since, I think Zack and Miri would be his last with Kevin Smith. So he didn't do Tusk, he didn't do Yoga Hosers, and he didn't do...
Yeah, I knew he wasn't on Red State or anything, but I figured he'd have come back for Reboot, because that was like a revisiting of the Viewer universe.
No, he didn't.
Oh, that kind of makes me sad.
I don't know if at that point he'd have been busy with the Grinch, but also he, as Kevin Smith has said many times, he didn't go to film school to be a producer. So
no, 100%. Yeah, 100%. It was So no, Kevin Smith is such a lovely guy. I'm sure he's just like, he's off doing his thing, and I'm happy for him. I'm sure that's the way Kevin Smith sees it. So Kevin Smith has stated on multiple occasions that the character of Dante is a bit based on himself, and the character of Randall is based on his, eventually comic book men co-star, but at the time, his good friend Brian Johnson. That makes sense. Brian Johnson being the sort of sarcastic, guy that understands his position in the world and is just like, I don't care, this is all meaningless. Whereas Kevin Smith's like the one that's like trying to blow everything out of proportion and make his job seem loftier than it is. Like I feel like those two characters fit those two personalities quite well. Although I can't imagine Kevin Smith is quite as irritating as Dante, but yeah. Obviously, we already talked about this was filmed at the same store in which director Kevin Smith was working at the time. So he was only allowed to film outside of business hours, and we already touched on this, but because they couldn't afford day for night lights to shine through the windows to make it look like the daytime, they then introduced the idea into the plot of the shutters always being down, which allowed him to shoot at night and claim it was the day, but there was no light coming into the store because of the shutters. They shot for 21 nights, as we mentioned earlier. Kevin Smith would clock in at 6 a.m., for the job of working at the convenience store, finish at 11 p.m, and then he would shoot from 11 p.m. till 4 a.m, in which he would then try and grab a couple of hours sleep before getting ready to go back to work. Now, I will say that while I'm sure that absolutely happened, I've done shift jobs. You don't work 7 days a week, 6 a.m. till 11 p.m. So he won't have done that every day. He will have had days off, or days where he just worked half the shift, like he either opened or closed. Shift work doesn't work like that normally. He definitely will have done that, I'm sure, while making the movie, but it won't have been every day. I just want to clarify, because I feel like that's the way people always treat that fact. So the film's shoestring budget is why it was shot in black and white, because there was a number of different types of lighting that would have been required, and a lot of post-production to resolve issues related to lighting and the colour temperatures. Black and white film stock was cheaper, and it would have meant less editing work on colour correction, colour grading, which is why they went with that. But in the years since, fans have often posited that it's to give the film a sort of security camera feeling, which Kevin Smith has himself said he likes the theory so much that he sort of adopted it as his own explanation of why the movie was shot in black and white, which I think is very cute. The RST in RST Video stands for Rajiv, Saria, and Tarlochan. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. These are the names of the son, mother, and father team who owned and still own the video store and the Quick Stop. So there you go.
There you go.
No cigarette brand is ever named in the movie, primarily to avoid lawsuits and royalty payments.
It is amazing how they get away with all the products being in the store, isn't it?
Well, any that are featured prominently, so there's a Hostess fruit pie sign, and they literally painted over it and wrote like Joe's, fruit pies or something like that, to avoid that. So anyone that's like in the very, very foreground, they cover, and the background ones, I guess, are so small you couldn't call it product placement, so to speak. So you couldn't really. It's just they're filming in a store. I guess that's how they got around it. Your product isn't featured prominently, so shut up. It's not like Randall's there clearly eating a pack of M&Ms or something with the logo facing out or anything like that.
That's fair. Just to loop back to the Mosier thing, he did cameo in Reboot, and it looks like he cameoed in Clerks 3 as well. So there's definitely no bad blood between those two, just to make clear.
Well, are they still podcasting together, or does Smodcast no longer include any Mosier at all?
No, he doesn't. Mosier doesn't do any podcasting with him. And Smith has talked quite emotionally a few times about how they kind of had to learn to be friends again because all their interactions were podcast based.
Oh, that's interesting. Also a little sad.
Yeah.
I'll never relearn to be your friend, Chris. We only talk like this now.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I just can't see a world where one of us stops doing it. The podcast, so
yeah. We'll just talk like this forever.
I think we'd still talk even if we didn't do the podcast. I think we'd still regularly talk.
Yeah, very much so. This is why we did the podcast. We were having these conversations anyway. Let's put a microphone.
And we actually. We don't just maybe not so much on the phone that would tend to happen before or after a podcast, but we actually message each other about. I would say actually the majority of our messages are not about the podcast. The majority, if you looked at our WhatsApp thread,
right,
it is two mates talking more than it is us.
Yeah, 100%. Like there's definitely like 8:00 on Saturday. Yeah, sure, but the messages will all say like, "Oh, I'm ready to go." But other than that, it's mostly like us just chatting about, usually pop culture stuff, film and TV stuff, usually, but all sorts of stuff. Yeah.
Like yesterday, Dan sent a 2-minute voice note talking about the Trump trials. Where and it was so funny because I listened to the voice note and Jess was in the room and I finished the voice note and Jess went, "What was his?" He didn't ask a question. What was it? I was like, I think he was just getting his thoughts down.
He didn't sort of... Well, wait a second. A back and forth doesn't require everything to have a question.
No. But it was just funny because you even acknowledged we weren't talking about that before anyway. So it's just like this really this 2-minute voice note where you're literally.
It's a subject we've covered in the past, though, isn't it? Because we've often talked about how.
No. I got that, but you could see how, from her point of view,
right, yeah.
She was like, did you send him a voice note about the Trump thing?" And I was like, no. That's just Dan commenting.
Well,
so,
I think that's the true side of a functional friendship, though, is we've had those conversations in the past, so without any need to be like, "Hey mate, how you doing? I was just wondering what you thought on this thing."
Yeah.
Not needed. Because I know we've had the conversation, and I'm almost adding to a conversation we probably had 4 months ago. You know what I mean?
I think we'd had it recently. I think we'd had it the other day actually. But it's Anyway,
that's funny. So back to the Triv. Let's. We're so close. We're so close, Chris. Kevin Smith's mother, Grace Smith, plays the milkmaid in this movie. It's just really interesting watching her sift through the milk and thinking, what's my son got me on the floor sifting through milk? Prior to him, being a successful director, she must have thought that was very strange. The smoker's lung that the Chuli's gum rep slams on the counter is actually a calf's liver, presumably acquired from a butcher, thrown in dirt and then burned with cigarettes. Sure. The scene where Dante confronts Caitlin about her engagement to the Asian design major in the video store is done in one shot, lasts for over 5 minutes, and it was the first thing shot on the first night of filming. It's a heavy scene to start with.
Very much.
Let's see. The anti-smoking sentiment in the movie represents Kevin Smith's own viewpoint when he wrote the screenplay. Silent Bob doesn't inhale when he puffs his cigarettes because of this, but after the movie, he became a 2-pack-a-day smoker. That's tragic.
Really? Oh, wow. Wow. God.
Yeah. I don't know if it was the stress or what, but there you go.
I'll ring a bell for that. I don't think I knew that, or if I did know that, I didn't retain that information.
There you go. Ding. I've got one.
Ding, ding.
Ding, ding. Jason Mewes was so camera shy that during... you mentioned this earlier, but just to give the full details. Jay was so camera shy that during the dance scene with him and Smith, everyone had to leave and go into the video store, so they just set up the camera, hit roll, and then walked out, and then Mewes, that way, wouldn't be nervous and would perform. I think that's adorable.
I agree.
Despite having no violence in the film, with the exception of the fight with Dante and Randall, it was originally given an NC-17 rating by the MPAA board based solely on the graphic dialogue. The distributors Miramax hired, and I swear this is true, Alan Dershowitz of the O.J. Simpson defense team to successfully petition the MPAA to lower the rating to R without making a single cut, which they won. That's
Kevin Smith fought ratings a lot, I think, throughout his career.
He has. Yeah, there was a documentary made at a certain point about the MPAA and their rating system, and Kevin Smith volunteered to be, or was contacted and gladly was part of that movie and spoke at length in the film. I'd have to look up what the name of the film was, but there was a documentary made on the subject, and Kevin Smith contributed quite a bit to it. What's it called? This Film Is Not Yet Rated is the name of the documentary. Great documentary, if anyone wants to see it. It's about how kind of backwards and ill thought out that system actually is. Great little documentary. Recommend it to anyone who's interested. But I'll be honest with you, the thing I learned while doing this that I didn't previously know was that they'd hired Alan Dershowitz from the O.J. Simpson defense team. That was my ding-ding when I was reading through the trivia. I was like, really?
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah.
So, the original title of the film was Inconvenience. I think that's actually a really good title, but it's a little subtle, maybe. So it was originally, then it was changed to something a bit more overt, which is Rude Clerks, and then didn't really roll off the tongue, just shortened to Clerks. Drop the is what they said.
Yeah, I think Inconvenienced is used in the background of something. I think Inconvenienced comes back up as somewhere in the viewer skew, like they use that as a thing. I think somewhere. I can't remember where. I remember here. It might even be a spoiler. That might even be something to do with Clerks 3. I can't remember, but yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Just who knows? But yeah, it's well, someone knows. But
weirdly,
we don't know.
What's amazing is for how passionately Dan and I have talked about this movie, Kevin Smith. We haven't seen Clerks 3 because we're waiting to see it together.
Yeah, we really made a point that we watch it together, and we've yet to do that. So we need to find time to do that because I'm really desperate to see it. I think it'd be as I said, really important movie. But we've not seen 3 yet. The Clerks logo that you see on a lot of the posters and the video and stuff. It's not in everything because often it just goes down to that sort of like that sort of standard screenwriting font that they use for the black and white Clerks logo, but the colourful logo with the different letters chopped together is made out of letters cut from various magazines and food items. The C is from Cosmopolitan magazine, the L is from Life magazine, the E is from Rolling Stone, the R is from Ruffles potato chips, and the K is from the Clark bar, and the S is from the box of Goobers, which is an American sort of candy thing that I've never tried, but I looked at when I was in the States and thought, no, they look grim. Decided against it. I was like, no, I think my body can go without putting those inside of it. I think I'll be better off for not eating than consuming that product.
Yeah.
Final piece of trivia. And this isn't really related to the movie, we're just answering a question raised in the movie, and I found this interesting. The reason the prices in America end in 99 cents or 95 cents, set, sort of under a round figure, was that so that cashiers would always have to open the register and give change. Because if it was all round numbers, they could take the $10 bill and just pocket it. Because they'd never have to open the till. They could just sign it away. So that's why a lot of businesses did that. That way they have to record the sale because the customer needs... To get the customer their change, they have to open the till. So the sale has to be recorded in the till.
Well, that makes sense.
It's clever. It's clever. Rewind Reviews, Chris, has its most famous segment, and I wasn't sure we'd have one for this movie, but we do indeed have, in the truest sense, Cars Exist. Ooh, I like that. That was a good noise you made, Chris. For those who don't know, inexplicably, when I do trivia for these movies, there's always either some trivia website, usually the trivia section on IMDb, where someone has just named the model of car. And they just do. And I always find it amusing, because it's just a weird thing to just be like, this person's car is this. Today's one, word for word, from the Wikipedia page, is Dante's car is a 1976 Buick Century. Cars exist!
Okay. Cars exist.
Right. So, next film. I've got to figure it out, haven't I? I don't know if I said it. I think I said it at the beginning. So I've still not decided what I want to choose. One way or the other?
Can I add a bit of trivia while you're thinking about it?
Sure. Add some trivia.
Because also an actor, it's an excuse to shout out as well. Because probably the only main actor we've not shouted out is Lisa Spooner, who plays Caitlin. Taken from the world tragically, way too young, and she's brilliant in the movie. She's really good. She makes you like you dislike the character, but not in a way but not in like an overtly negative way. Almost like it's. I think she's really great in it. And her and Jeff Anderson met on the set of the film. Kissed during production and then got engaged 3 weeks later. And the bit of it that's they ultimately didn't end up staying married, but the bit of it that Jeff Anderson talks about in the documentary is he said to Kevin, when they announced their engagement to Kevin said, "Oh, that's going to be great for promoting the movie." Like, basically, he could already see that was a story they could spin out of it, and they did do that. Like he did spin that into a bit of a story about the movie. So yeah, it's I thought that trip was interesting, but also just a shout out to Lisa Spooner.
Yeah, who does a great job. And we mentioned her by name, but we credit as well to Marilyn Gallotti because Veronica is a hard character to sort of like land, I think, in there's a real balance to strike with Veronica, and she does a great job. She does a really good job. One thing actually, this isn't trivia, just something I want to talk about is the poster for this movie. It's fucking weird. I don't know why they put Kevin Smith in the poster. Very much not looking like Silent Bob. And I also think that they've obviously tried to make it look like it's like a more sort of like ensemble film by also making sure the two lead actresses who are in a lot less of the film than obviously Dante and Randall are like front and center on the poster.
It's got Kevin Smith but not Jay on it as well.
Yeah, it's a weird poster, and I think I remember Kevin talking about this, and he was there for the shoot of the photo, and someone was like, "Why aren't you? You're in the movie, right? Get in the photo shoot." And he's like, "Oh no, Jay and Silent Bob, and also Silent Bob has long hair, I think, and this is him with short hair. It's all wrong. It's just all wrong.
It looks like a promo shot, not designed to be the poster. It looks like they were all together for an event and they got them to do some shots and it ended up being
really
the poster.
Strange. It's really strange. And also because they don't look like their characters in some cases. Like I feel like this is gonna sound weird, but I don't see Veronica wearing that hat. Veronica has like a really kind of like uptight hairstyle, and it's all wrong. It's just all wrong. So I would say uptight. That's maybe the wrong way to phrase it. Like a really, like, very well maintained, very particular kind of hairstyle, and put it, and having her with long hair, but the hat just feels very different. So yeah, it does. You're right. It feels like a promo shot that they sort of turned into a poster. Really strange. Anyway, next week, what are we doing? Okay, I'm committing to one of these movies. Okay, I've chosen. All right, we're doing it. So recently, I've had a spark in interest, Chris, in a franchise I loved as a child that I've not really revisited. This is a film that I loved, but have always been scared to go back and watch. I have very fond memories of this film, but I'm terrified it's terrible, is basically the summary. Next week, we're going to be watching the original 1990s Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie.
Nice.
Which was a real favourite of mine.
What I love about that is you could have been talking about Clerks too.
Yeah. I tried to keep it vague. I am a little scared. Clerks 2 was also terrible, but that's and I've not really. I don't think I've seen that a huge amount since. I think I've probably watched it a couple of years after, but I don't know if I watched it.
I think the emotional punch at the end, I suspect, holds up. But yes, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Never seen it. Excited to see it.
Yeah, I mean, I was a big fan of the cartoon and was a bit shocked at the darkness of the movie, because the cartoon is obviously quite light. I remember sitting to see the movie and being like, "Well, this feels very different," but also being enthralled by that because it felt like someone made an adult version of the characters to young Dan. So we'll see if that holds up or if it ends up still feeling like a family film. So yeah, and I'm going to back pocket the other choice and not tell you what it was on this occasion because I may still get to it this series.
Nice. That's exciting. And yeah, I think I've seen bits of it. I've seen it on in the background, but I don't think I've ever proactively sat down to watch it. So good choice. I'm excited. Hey Dan, what if an audience member listening to this is so excited that they want to watch it right now? What are they? I suppose there's no way of doing that, is there?
Well, Chris, if they're not already a Patreon, then... Well, because if they're already a Patreon, there is no way to do that because they're already listening to this a week in advance, and therefore they still have to wait a week for the next one. But if you're listening to this on like iTunes or Spotify or any of the other podcast platforms that are available, then guess what? If you want to hear us talk about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, a choice that was absolutely not at all inspired by the fact that I recently watched Mutant Mayhem and loved it. It's a great movie. You should all go see Mutant Mayhem. Just put that in there. Then the other way to hear it early would be to go to our Patreon. Patreon.com/nothingbutstatic, where for as little as $1 a month, Chris, just $1 a month. It's peanuts. No, there's a cost of living crisis on. That might actually be a lot of money for someone, and if that's the case, definitely don't support. But yeah, no. If as I've always said with the Patreon, whatever amount of money was to fall out of your pocket and you wouldn't notice is always the right amount to give. And if that amount is zero because money is tight, absolutely do not do this. But yeah, you can get episodes of that a week early, both that and Analyzing Avatar, our show we're reviewing currently. Korra, we just finished season 2. The next one we'll be doing once this series of Rewind Reviews is finished is season 3 of Korra. You can also get access to our Discord and exclusive content such as Nothing But Lyrics, which is a podcast where we review, make fun of, and try to dissect the lyrics of famous pop songs, usually from the sort of 2000s, like the era we grew up, like the early 2000s. I don't think we broke that date range yet, have we? Like 90s, late 90s, early thousands has been pretty much where we've been firmly sat. So maybe we need to break that cycle.
Yeah, there's a few that have been more modern. I'd have to look at the list. I'd suspect maybe Crazy Stupid Love is the most modern we've done, but I wouldn't know for sure.
I was talking about Nothing But Lyrics.
Oh, sorry. For some reason, I must admit, I drifted off. I hadn't drifted off. I was looking something up about Clerks. Yes, no, you're right. We've not gone beyond that for the songs, Dan. That's correct.
Oh, I love my job sometimes. So yeah, you can support us on the Patreon. You get episodes a week early and you get access to those bonus podcasts. The other thing, of course, you can do if you want to support us but you don't want to give money, then you can tell a friend. You can like and subscribe on the various platforms that we have. You can head over to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/nothingbutstatic UK, where you can leave a comment and like a video, any of that stuff. That all supports what we do. And of course, the other thing you can do that supports us is just to keep listening. We love you for doing that. That is its own form of support, and we appreciate you. I think that's everything. Oh yeah, if you have any thoughts on anything we've talked about in this podcast, mail at nothingbutstatic.co.uk. We don't always get back to people, but we do very much enjoy reading the comments and the feedback we get. I tell you, the real reason often we don't get back to people is because they send these really interesting, eloquent emails, and I go, oh, I need to really sit down. I can't just reply, thanks. Glad you like the podcast. I usually feel like, I should really sit down and take 10, 15 minutes to comprise an answer that this email deserves. And then I never have that amount of time. So it doesn't happen. So if you don't get a reply, take it as a compliment. That's what I'm saying. But yeah, thanks everyone for listening. We're big fans of you guys. But that is everything for this week. So let's wrap this up, Chris. I think you do the ending on this one.
Yes, I've been Chris Billingham.
I've been Dan Doolan.
And this review has been Rewound.